Welcome back, everybody.
Thanks.
To everyone who is watching or listening. I'm once again joined by Pete Manchester, and this is a continuation of our study in Genesis, the story of Joseph. So, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be back in Grove City. It's nice and warm, sunny outside. It was a beautiful day today. It's good to be back.
So.
Yeah.
Very much. Very nice to have you back.
Thanks.
So, well, in the last episode, we'll call it an episode, we started in Genesis 37, and let's do like a quick recap of the main things that we talked about, and then we'll jump off from there. We talked about a lot of very interesting concepts, such as what is the symbolism of the coat of many colors.
Well, more than that, clothing in general. That seems to be a motif throughout this book, or at least this series of stories. And the phrase that you return to is clothing as role.
Clothing as role.
That's
a motif.
That came up a lot.
Yeah. And, the other day I was thinking about the coat of many colors again, and it reminded me of something. And so I did a little bit more digging into the Egyptian goddess Iris.
Oh.
And Iris was associated with the rainbow. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I wondered, what was Iris's role in the mythology, in the Egyptian mythology? And she was a minor character. She didn't have like major stories centered around her, but the role that she played in the pantheon was similar to that of the Greek Hermes. She was a messenger of the gods. And I thought that was very fitting.
For him to be wearing a rainbow cloak while he's professing these dreams.
Exactly. He's this prophet figure.
A messenger from God, from the Lord.
Yeah.
The living God.
So I thought that was very interesting.
So fascinating, yeah. I mean,
mythological connection there.
Yeah, maybe not during his own lifetime. Like, I think he lost that cloak by the time he got down to Egypt. But for the readers that this was intended for, who knows? That may have been foremost in their minds. I'm not sure.
So,
of course, earlier in this same book, we did establish that, or not we, but the writer establishes that that's not where the rainbow came from.
it is just a pretty interesting connection.
It is.
And then we talked about the loss of innocence.
The loss of innocence and its role in maturation. And it goes through experiencing malevolence and betrayal. And then we talked about him finding himself in a dark place, but that his response was responsibility and taking on the burdens of others to make the world as he knew it as good as he could. Right. And the phrase I was stuck on in that discussion was seeing beyond. So we talked a little bit about that, I think, off mic about why I chose that verbiage. Did we decide on a better phrase?
I think that was a good phrase for what you were getting at, that he was seeing the spiritual side of things, that he was seeing forces beyond the immediately observable.
Right.
So, yes.
And that's kind of what what allowed him or what encouraged him to continue on through dark times with this sense of responsibility and to some extent sort of thrive in the midst of adversity, was that that wasn't the only thing he was seeing. Yeah, so that's something we talked about.
And then a couple of motifs that we want to keep in mind. I mentioned the motif of two, and not just two, but two dreams particularly.
Well, and two children. We've got a couple sets of twins.
Yes, we do.
We've got a couple
once in the family.
Pairs of dreams.
We talked about the motif of subversion or usurping.
Right. Well, I think that is more broadly within the motif of the firstborn and the birthright. So we've been tracing that as well. And you have noted that the birthright through this particular family doesn't really follow any sort of list of firstborn people.
Any conventional.
Right. So so whereas normally birthright and firstborn are paired concepts, in these stories that's constantly subverted, which is where the subversion comes in. So we constantly expect the birthright to fall to the firstborn, and for some reason it doesn't.
By some divine intervention.
Yeah.
And we talked about a major incident in Judah's life concerning his children and grandchildren.
Yes.
And that not only was this story of Judah and Tamar in 38, the story of the continuation of how the lineage of the Messiah came to be the lineage of Judah, but also in the story of Joseph, it was a influencing episode that we could touch on later on when we see Judah again. And on that note, we also talk by extension the relationship between Judah and Joseph and what it means for the one with the birthright and his relationship with the one who is the prophet among the family.
Right. And how these contemporary figures and these concurrent stories are both about the messianic lineage in one extent. Through Judah and then his son / levirate grandson Perez, you have the messianic bloodline, but then through Joseph is more of a spiritual lineage, where Joseph is almost like a type of Christ.
He was like a pre-Christ
story, or a pre-Christ. So it's interesting that these stories happen at the same time, because we're tracing their character arc development at the same time, and they're both kind of these sort of Jacob's successors along the way to eventually getting to Jesus. But they go about it very differently.
It's interesting to see different threads. It's like a polyphony, right? Moving together at the same time. Yes. And it's just a very fascinating narrative, the way it's written and the way it's recorded. Not just historical, but also symbolic.
And I had never thought before why the story of Judah and Tamar is placed where it is in the middle of the story about Joseph, until you mentioned that it's not about Joseph, that's about Judah, and the beginning of the Joseph story is important in Judah's character development. And so that's kind of the branch point, and then we kind of launch into both of these. So then, that I never thought of before.
Very much so. And then we talked about Joseph's temptation in Potiphar's house, and how his defense against temptation was his rightly structured hierarchy of values. Yeah. And that he had God at the top.
Rightly ordered loves.
One
could say.
The Augustinian.
Yeah, we didn't look that up, did we? Yeah.
It was Augustine.
Okay.
We're
pretty sure.
We'll go with it.
We'll put an 80% confidence interval on that. Yeah.
And that the temptation was to misplace a love, misplace the order that Joseph had put so much work into setting in his own life, only to the temptation to abdicate that responsibility and to conflate himself.
Right, that conflation. But because he was seeing beyond, or seeing a different hierarchy than maybe what everyone else around him saw, he didn't seem very tempted by the offer, which is interesting too. Yeah, we kind of talked about how he was just so ready to handle that. And the story is maybe less about how to fend off temptation as it is just about um, understanding your place in things, in your responsibility to the blessings God's given you.
Right.
Yeah.
And on the note of seeing beyond, we talked about this narrative pattern of Joseph being in the high place and then finding himself cast down to the pits of hell, not just once but twice. And this time we left off with Joseph in the darkest place in his story, and we're gonna explore what he did about that, And as I was thinking about how you were describing seeing beyond, and that the path was, although narratively, the way we see it, it's down and up, you were making the argument that in his development, in his progression, it is actually a straight line up to maturation and where he needed to be. Would you say that's a fair representation of what you were saying? And I was thinking about that. And, remember I brought up the labyrinth, and I thought the labyrinth was a really good representation of that too, because the labyrinth is this embodied concept of exploring the edges of the universe. It's like, because the labyrinth is a circle, it's a perfect, like symbolically, it's a perfect encapsulation of the totality of the universe. And then, but the faith is that by exploring the universe, you will find yourself in the center, which is where you need to be. Now, what's the difference between a labyrinth and a maze? You might wonder. And I didn't know this until a couple of days ago. But apparently a maze has wrong turns, dead ends. It gives you options. But a labyrinth, at least traditionally, especially the labyrinth that is is depicted in the churches, in old churches, is the labyrinth has no option for you to choose left or right.
There are labyrinths in churches?
Oh, it's really fascinating.
Okay, sorry. You said labyrinth, I'm thinking of like Menelaus and
Well, yes, but the church. So I can't remember which cathedral it is, but there's at least one cathedral, majestic, colorful cathedral somewhere in Europe, that has a labyrinth etched out in the center. So the cathedral is built in the shape of a cross. And in the center of the cross, where at the intersection, on the floor is this huge etched out labyrinth that people would walk through as a practice. So it definitely has spiritual connections there.
Is this like one of those meditative prayer walks where?
Yes.
Okay.
So the church has used it as a meditative prayer walk.
I have been to one of those in Galilee, actually, at a Benedictine church. It was really
Galilee,
cool.
like the Galilee?
The Galilee.
Dude,
Yeah.
I'm jealous.
It was really cool. And it's an interesting meditative experience. And it's funny you bring that up because you're right. In those sorts of walks, so for anyone who's not familiar, the ones that I've seen, it, like Nathaniel's saying, it fits in a circle, and the point is to eventually you get to the center, but like you're saying, it's kind of twisted and it almost goes in like quadrants of the circle. Usually a lot of them do. So you're not going in a spiral that's a straight line that leads you clearly to the center, but it is one line the whole way. It's just,
right.
You could call it convoluted or complex, complicated. It eventually gets you to the center. And so the point is you just concentrate on one step at a time, and it like each step is very meditative because even though it doesn't look apparent that you're going closer to the center, you know that you are. And with each step, you get closer to the center.
Right.
Even though sometimes you're actually walking towards the edge.
Right. Sometimes you take a turn towards the edge. And
that's very symbolic of what faith is. And faith is seeing beyond. Maybe that's the word I should be using this whole time. Seeing beyond is just faith, right? So because when you act in faith, what you're doing is you're saying, I can't see the unseen, but I know what I would see if I could see it. That's what you believe on faith.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone tells you at this prayer garden that if you just walk along the line, you'll get to the center, you believe that person. And you say, I know that if I could see this geometry laid out in a different sort of way, I would see this line as going straight to the center of the circle.
Mm-hmm.
But, and so you choose to act out of knowledge of what you would see if you could see differently. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, you're not acting based on what your eyes see. You're acting based on what you have been told is another way to see what you're looking at. So that's what Joseph was acting.
And I think the labyrinth is a good image that brings what you were saying last time and what I was saying together.
Absolutely.
That I was emphasizing the down and up pattern, that you need to go down in order to go up. And you were saying that it is one path straight if you look at it from the larger picture. And the labyrinth does just that, because even though you take turns, sometimes you take a turn that leads you obviously towards the center. And then other times you take a turn that leads you towards the edge, but you know there is just one path. That even though that you might be going towards the edge, away from the center in a sense, you know that each step is leading you towards it.
Exactly.
And so I just thought I should bring that up.
That's a much better picture than anything I came up with last week. That's brilliant. I did not know that difference about the labyrinth and a maze, but that puts the whole thing together. You know, that with a labyrinth, there isn't an option to turn to the side. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what we see with Joseph is, given many opportunities, he doesn't really turn to the side. He stays on the path. Somehow, despite his his kind of spoiled upbringing and maybe a little bit of haughtiness, as we talked about, there was a lot of wisdom under there that he somehow found. Probably not from his older brothers.
Probably not.
I don't know where he got it from, but the Lord seems to be blessing him for his wise action out of faith. One last thing I wanted to mention before we dive into this. I was thinking about clothing as role, and I thought it was interesting that his cloak was taken from him when he was sold into slavery. So he was stripped of his royalty, his sort of regal favoritism, and his identity, and he was sold, presumably, basically naked, into slavery. In Potiphar's house, we find him at some point, again, wearing a cloak. Even though he's a slave, he's a master of the household. And at least by the point that Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce him, he apparently is wearing a cloak because she grabs it and he runs out of it. And so it's interesting how you're saying he kind of climb his way to the top and he's cast back down again. So I think the symbolism is there in the clothing as well, where he got back to a point where he had significance, he had protection, sort of like he wasn't just like vulnerable or humiliated. He had some respectability, he had status, he had this cloak, and then once again, in that act of pulling that cloak off of him, it was kind of like the nail in his coffin. It was a bad situation before, and he's trying to argue, no, I can't sleep with you because you're the one thing my master hasn't given to me. She pulls that cloak off of him, and it's almost like saying, I'm going to send you right back to where you came from. And that's exactly what happened. In that act, not only was it symbolic of saying, I'm going to strip you of everything, but that's exactly what it did, where pulling off that cloak cascaded these events that lands him in prison. So again, I would expect probably naked again.
Yeah, and following the idea of robe as role, grabbing someone's robe is like taking hold of their place in society, let's say.
Yeah.
And so the brothers ripped him of his robe. They're placing him. They're ridding him of his place. And Potiphar's wife, by grabbing his clothes, she was also claiming control over his place.
And she did have, and that's what we see. She had control over it, apparently.
And the other thing,
he lost everything.
Yeah. And you pointed out that we're seeing this pattern of people ripping him of his robe, ripping the robe off of him. And later we're going to see the opposite of that.
Right.
Going to see the total opposite.
And we're going to see that this is the seeing beyond thing, that seeing a straight line out of a bunch of twists, is that he would not have gotten where he ended up if these people had not constantly stripped him of his status and his robes, So that's so fascinating. Just that, like you're saying, these are instances where it's being taken from him, but ultimately, it ends up better than any of them could have purposed.
You can see the reversal of all that.
Yeah, I guess we should.
And with that, so we left him at the deepest, darkest place that he has ever been.
Literally.
And then we're gonna talk about how he responds in the pits of hell. How do you respond? And I guess one of the questions that you can keep in mind as you read the story and listen is, and I'm wondering this too, is what does it take for a person to go through what Joseph did and still stay true to the cause? That's a good question that we can all ponder on.
That is an excellent question.
So with that, chapter 40.
Chapter 40.
So again, I'm going to read some verses. If something strikes out to you, feel free to jump in and we'll take it from there. So verse 1. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. So remember, Joseph was cast in prison, but then he followed this pattern of taking responsibility and he made himself of use in the prison. And the captain of the guard, was it captain? Yes. The keeper, the warden of the prison, put him in charge of the other prisoners. And,
right. And it says in 39:23, the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge. And then here we see he put these two people in Joseph's charge.
Right.
So it's interesting. He's kind of got his right-hand man here. He's kind of saying, all right, like I got these two troublemakers, Joseph, I'll just leave them to you.
Very much. Very much so. And so they were assigned to him and he attended to them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there was no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams."
This is so key. This is a little window into answering your question. We think of Joseph as a guy who interprets dreams, and even his brothers mocked him. Here comes the dreamer. Mm-hmm. He's had dreams of his own. He didn't know the interpretation. And here he comes with so much confidence to tell these people in his charge, I can interpret this for you. But where does that confidence come from? He knows that it's not his ability to interpret dreams, it's his communication with God. I mean, all he says is, interpretations to dreams belong to the Lord. Therefore, ask me, placing himself as a mediator in between God and other people. So that's Joseph as the messenger,
the prophet again,
the prophet, this kind of intermediary, like Christ in that sense. So he has been developing something that's led him to this point. He hasn't been developing a talent for interpreting dreams, but he's been developing an active mutual relationship with the living God. And suddenly he just appears with this confidence to say, tell me the dreams, I'll interpret them for you. Where is that coming from? Let's see where
relationship with God, or as I would describe it, his connection with that point, that transcendent point that revealed himself to him.
Right. And he solidifies that connection because his hierarchy is ordered properly.
Right.
And so he doesn't place himself too high and say, I can interpret these for you.
Right.
And he doesn't place himself in a disconnected place and say, well, I don't know. I mean, I know God and God can interpret dreams, but that doesn't have anything to do with me.
But because
he puts himself right in between.
He recognizes that the dreams did not originate in him.
Right. Or in them.
Yeah, or in them. In the very beginning, he received these dreams, but he knew that it did not originate in him, that it came from beyond, and therefore its meaning had to come from beyond too. And so...
But he knows he has access to beyond.
Right. And so with humility, he kept himself... What humility partly is putting yourself in your proper place.
Proper place.
Right. And so the people who lose sight of the thing that is beyond them will turn to tyrants. So, if I'm not mistaken, there's this, I'm pretty sure this is real. There's this British monarch tradition of the prime minister kneeling before the queen. And that's quite similar, reminds me of the not Babylonian, but in an ancient culture, way before Israel, that there's this tradition for the king to kneel before the priest, and he would be examined for how well, he would be stripped of his royal garments, and he would be examined for how well he lived up to the standards of the gods. And this idea of even the king is subject to the transcendent, right? And the ancient peoples recognized that was necessary to prevent the king from becoming a tyrant, right? Because once a king conflates himself with God, that's where we get tyrants. When the king loses sight of the beyond, of something that's beyond and greater than himself, that's where we get tyrants. And so what a healthy, benevolent king requires is that vision, that he is of his proper place in the grand scheme of things. And so that's the same spirit that we see in Joseph, that he didn't become a tyrant because he had that vision. So, anything else on that? Or should I continue?
That's good.
Cool. So, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Okay, so we get into the dreams.
Oh, no, one more thing. Sorry. Fool you. No, I just looked down at my Bible and noticed something. Do not interpretations belong to God? Interesting that he's talking to two Egyptians and he refers to God in a singular manner.
Well, it's not Yahweh, and so it could be a general term for God. And the Egyptians also had an arch-god, a top god like the Greeks, if I'm not mistaken.
A top god. Oh, Ra. Yeah, that's true. But that's not who his relationship is with. I don't know where I was going with that, but you're right. It's not, my Bible has a capital G, but the whole word isn't capital. So it's not the personal name of God. I don't know if...
No one knew the personal name of God at this point.
Yes, it has not been revealed yet. There's no tetragrammaton, as it were. So Joseph, I just think that's interesting, that he is not afraid to assert his relationship with his God as the God to whom interpretations of dreams belong. Maybe that wasn't worth interrupting you over. I don't really know where I was going.
No, that's a good point. I don't think the Egyptians were particular about which gods were or were not gods.
Okay.
As polytheists, I was pretty sure they are they were tolerant of other gods.
Tolerant. I see. They coexist with other
But they're desperate. We have no one to interpret them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're willing to listen. All right, verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me. And on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.
I think it could be easy to get caught up in reinterpreting the dreams and the symbolism therein. Which we could do if you wanted to, but it's interesting that sort of as a mythology, you really see Joseph looking kind of like an epic hero here, where I almost feel like the writer just tells you the dream so that you can be amazed at the interpretation. Like the dream itself isn't important, but it's like, wow, he got that from that. It's kind of a wacky, just reaching out and squeezing it. And he's like, how did he know 3 branches meant 3 days? So it's kind of this epic shining moment where Joseph just steps in and he just knows what to do. He knows what to say. And not only that, he's witty. I mean, he plays on the previous interpretation. When he talks to the baker, he will also lift up your head right off of your shoulders.
Yeah.
Mean place to make a joke, but he just looks like a hero here. I mean, he's shining. He's a star. He's a stud. I just think it's that we get so much detail here, but it's almost just kind of for our own amazement and entertainment.
Do you think there's any significance to the 2 men being a cupbearer and a baker? Any symbolic significance?
Wow. How have I never noticed this before? Yeah.
It's also noticed a point of note that the 2 men and their dreams are food related.
Okay, so let's go there. So they are food related. There's the motif of 3 because this Pharaoh's birthday is in 3 days. Amazing that none of these people put that together. You have the cupbearer who takes the grapes and he puts the wine into the cup. Mm-hmm. And so his position will be restored. The baker, however, he's already got the bread and it's being removed. So his life is forfeit. So that's a contrast, right? That you have the receptacle and then the food or drink item either going in or out. There's the motif of the three. There's the crows, which the way that they're pecking at the bread, like when someone's hanged or impaled, the crows would gather and pick the flesh of the body, and then we're going to bring this back in. So where else have you seen bread symbolize the flesh of someone's dead body? Well, that would be, of course, the Last Supper, or the Passover, potentially, sort of.
Bread and wine.
Bread and wine.
Baker, cupbearer.
We have the Eucharist in prison with Joseph.
Any further proof that Joseph is this pre-Christ figure?
He's the pre-Christ. So, okay, so how far can we go with this? Does it mean anything that the cupbearer was spared and the baker put to death?
I don't know.
Maybe not.
But, yes, actually. The first dream was that of prosperity. The second dream was that of death. You're going to see that again.
Okay. Prosperity first, then.
This episode, again, 2 dreams. This episode, with the cupbearer and the baker, is a foreshadowing of Pharaoh's dreams and Joseph's later interpretation of the harvest and famine.
Is it kind of a foreshadowing? It's interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, so you have the cupbearer putting wine into the cup, saying that prosperity will be flowing. And then you have bread being removed from the basket, symbolizing famine. Clearly, like the lacking for bread. Okay. Yeah, that holds up. That's interesting.
3 days.
It gets very complex.
The motif of 3 days. For one, it is salvation. For the other, it is damnation.
So what you're saying is this Christ figure who's being unjustly punished is talking to 2 criminals, one of whom he asks to, let me say it this way. It's like Jesus on the cross with a criminal on either side of him, and one mocks him, and then one said, now Joseph asks the cupbearer, remember me. But when Jesus died, there was one of the criminals who said that to Jesus, remember me.
Remember me.
And he said, you'll be with me this day in paradise. And that didn't happen for Joseph. Joseph was not with the cupbearer that day in the Pharaoh's palace. That's so fascinating.
Very interesting parallels we see here. But I never realized what you said about squeezing the wine to the cup and the bread being picked off of him. I didn't put that together, so that's really good. That's probably how he received the interpretation.
Who knows, man? At this point, he's clearly very in step with the Spirit of God, and he received this divinely.
But narratively, this is a foreshadowing.
Very much so.
Right? And Joseph pleads to be remembered, to be restored. Again, what does it mean to remember? Literally, to make a member again, to remember something to you. And so Joseph desires to be restored, to be made a member of something, of a life of blessing, of something else. But he had to wait a lot more than he liked for that to happen.
Definitely.
Shall we move on?
We don't have to, but we can.
Well, let's move on if you have nothing else. 41. When 2 full years had passed since then, so he had to wait 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. So we're seeing the motif again. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. He had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. So, Pharaoh's dreams out of the Nile. So for the Egyptian, of course, the Nile is the source of life.
Right. Source of life, fertility, spirituality. Yeah, it was very central to the culture.
Right. So the Nile produced 7 healthy cows. Great, life. And then out of the Nile came death and overtook the 7 healthy cows. So it would be understandable if Pharaoh had some concern with maybe the god of the Nile. But that was not mentioned. But in an Egyptian mind, you might wonder, okay, what might be happening with our relationship with the god of the Nile? And we're seeing this motif of 2 dreams once again. 7 cows, 7 heads of grain. Of course, the number of perfection. And
in Hebrew culture, I don't know about Egyptian culture.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. But at least from a literary perspective, since it's written for the Hebrew people, we can take it that way. So 7 perfection, the number of perfection with life and death. So we're kind of seeing this idea of the perfection of life and the perfection of death, like the totality of each of those. The perfection of order and the perfection of chaos. So understandably, this is terrifying because we're seeing the totality of these 2 diametric beings or states of existence coming together and clashing. And we are seeing chaos win in the end. At least it seems that way. And so that's a very terrifying thought.
Yeah, he's clearly very troubled. I mean, he calls all the wise men, throughout the land. Interesting, the food motif. I think grain, to some degree, has appeared in all the dreams we've seen so far. All the pairs of dreams. There's been a grain dream somewhere. So this story is perhaps not for those intolerant to gluten. But
sorry, gluten-free.
Yeah, we
people.
Apologize on behalf of the scriptures. But yeah, he's got this time cows instead of grapes or stars. And it's interesting that you have these thin, sickly cows swallowing up the fat cows. It's like ears of grain swallowing up other grains. Like those aren't that doesn't happen, right? Grain doesn't swallow anything. Skinny animals can't swallow fat animals. That's just not. It's very surreal, and so it is the opposite of what you'd expect. Like, there's no reason for him to expect that prosperity would be followed by famine. So, the order of events is alarming. Also, it's interesting. I just wanted to mention this footnote. At this time, with 2 whole years having passed, Joseph would be 30 years old, having been in Egypt for about 12 or 13 years.
Yeah, he started off in the story as a 17-year-old.
Right.
So do the math.
Yeah, well, I didn't. I refused to do the math. My Bible did it for me. Thanks, Zondervan. Crossway. But as we look at what happens to Joseph in this story, it might be interesting to keep in mind that he is the same age as Christ was when he started his ministry. Just a thought. Just some typology sauce for this feast of symbolism here.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, oh, he remembered. Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Oh, I am ashamed. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. Same sentiment, same desperation as the ones before. No one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. And the lean ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. Pause there for a little bit.
Oh, let's pause for a lot of bit. Oh,
I just want to point out
the main course has been served, mon frere.
Minor point first. If after the ugly cows ate up the fat cows, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as terrible as before. So again, it's hammering home the totality of the death, the totality of the chaos, emphasized by the number 7 as well. Right. So it's like,
this isn't hungry cows benefiting from eating fat cows. This is sickliness overtaking healthiness.
Right, and it's complete desolation.
Yeah.
And then
with nothing left of the fat cows.
Right. There's
no
not
vestige
a trace
of prosperity to be found.
No trace of prosperity left. Right. Okay, so that's the minor point. And then backtracking a little bit to something that we've already talked about, that Joseph once again recognized it was not him from whom dreams and interpretations come.
He's very quick to make that correction. It's not in me. Yeah.
What if he had not made that point?
Well, we'll never know, thankfully, but one can only guess. If you take credit for something that you're about to do, except you're not the one who's going to be doing it, how likely is the person actually going to who's actually going to do it be to do that knowing that you have claimed all the credit beforehand, you know?
May I suggest that if Joseph had conflated himself with God and by extension become a tyrant of his own, that we would not see the salvation of his brothers.
No, I mean, you have to wonder, would the interpretation have come to him at all? Would he have given a bad
Well,
one?
we could say that
Or
the
would he have
same
made
things would have
something up?
happened. We could say that the same things would have happened, that the 7 years of prosperity and the 7 years of famine would still happen, and Joseph would still be the second-hand man to Pharaoh. But would Joseph have responded to his family the same way? That's a good question, and we can return to that when we get there.
Interesting. I'd never thought about that from the perspective of how it would corrupt him, choosing that the lazy way.
Because I mean, we'll get to it when we get there. We'll talk about it when we get there. But the reasoning, the thought process, the mentality that Joseph had as he dealt with his brothers and reconciled with them, the reasons he gave, we see the roots of that here. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, I mean, we saw in the last chapter, he didn't forget what happened to him, obviously. He's at his lowest point right here. He's been forgotten to rot in prison. He thought maybe he had his moment. But he gets called up to the big leagues, and you got to think he's thinking, this is my one shot out of here,
Yeah.
All right, so we want to talk about clothing his role.
I was about to get there.
He shaves and he changes. But
he was still a slave.
This is different. Yeah. He hasn't acquired any status. This is simply an audience before the king.
Right. But it's still a change in role.
It's a change in role, but it's very different than the clothing role relationships that we've seen so far. So this is not something that was bestowed on him or symbolic of his standing. Actually, this has everything to do with Pharaoh. And this is Joseph cleansing himself or being cleansed to be permitted to stand before the majesty of the king. Now, he's 30 years old. We're about to finally see the pivot where everything he's been working for is going to pay off.
I would say it's still a change in role though, because...
Well, hold on a second. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I didn't describe that well, but let me link one more point to this, and then we'll go back and talk about the role. Maybe I'm jumping around a bit. But so he's cleansing himself so that he can stand before the majesty of the king. Now, when Jesus was 30 years old, and he finally put his hand to the work he had been preparing for, he was baptized by John the Baptist, cleansed in the water, and when he came back up, the Holy Spirit descended on him like a dove, and the voice of the Father was heard, and he said, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." So this is a very strong parallel. You have Joseph cleansing himself, Joseph coming out of his humility and cleansing himself, and then standing before the majesty of the king. Then you have Jesus, kind of at a similar time in his life, be washed in the River Jordan, and then the glory of God descends on him.
Right. It's like a kind of baptism to be renewed. So Joseph, the cleansing fire of hell, right? Joseph has passed through the pits of hell, and now he's ready for the next step. And so he's cleansed and he puts on new clothing. So that's why I'm saying that it is still signifying the beginning of change in role.
Definitely.
In Joseph's life.
Definitely. Whereas before we've seen him being stripped of his garments, this time they are put on him. They're not his, right? But they're given to him, they're put on him. So this is a little bit opposite of what we've seen so far, where
because he has gone through the pruning, we will say that.
Yeah.
The pruning of the coat of innocence, and then the coat of a slave, into utter death. And now we're seeing the resurrection. And so he's being given a new robe. And he's being bestowed like just, renewal.
Yeah, renewal.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, he shaved, the poor guy, he hasn't shaved in like 2 years. It's looking fuzzy.
More than that.
Of course, if that was us, no one would notice. But for Joseph, he probably was looking scruffy. So yeah, he shaves, he puts new clothes on. And so it's like he steps out of prison and is granted at least this chance to stand before the king. And in doing so, he remains steady in his character that he's developed so far. So even though externally this is a huge pivot point in his life, I mean, he went from prison, from the lowest place, to the throne room of Pharaoh. I mean, he's speaking with Pharaoh. Not only that, he's hearing Pharaoh's dreams. I mean, this is fairly intimate, and he is saying things that no one else in all the land can say. All these men of esteem and prestige, they don't know. They're baffled by this, but he knows. So he has this. It seems from the outside to be a complete reversal of events. I mean, he goes from the lowest point to the highest point. He couldn't have bounced back faster. But in his heart, he sees it as just the next step on the same journey, which is amazing that he has the capacity to stabilize himself that much. But he keeps his hierarchy where he knows it should be. As you said, he mentioned it's not in me, it's with the Lord. And he just does what he's done before. Right. Just does the same thing.
Because when your eye is fixed on the North Star, no matter what you go through, hell or high water, it's still the same path. With that in mind, I could also say how high you can go. Can I say this?
Float it out here and we'll see. Yeah.
Not foolproof, but
okay.
How high you can go is dependent on how low you're willing to go. You know, I'm reminded of Dante's Divine Comedy. To pass through purgatory and receive the heights of heaven, he had to go through the deepest level of hell.
Yeah, I think you can say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except he doesn't seem to be keeping track. I don't think that means he expected.
But taking a step back, like, and there's a lesson for us because who said it? It might have been Jung, but correct me if I'm wrong. But how the thing you need to see and the place you need to be at is where you least want to look. And for us, I'm a huge proponent of being willing to look in the dark places. Now, granted, I'm more of a pessimistic person and dark in nature, so I'm more willing to do that than others. But I do believe that is a reality, that is a reality of life and how we as human beings ought to navigate this world, that we ought to look into the dark places.
Yeah, I think you've lost your right to call yourself a pessimist, because what you've actually just said is looking in the darkest places is how you achieve the most in the end. So you've put the most positive spin possible on the darkest events possible. I don't think you can say you're a pessimist anymore. Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you are willing to look into the dark places, and I'm not sure if Joseph was necessarily trying to investigate the dark places, but he wasn't shaken when he found himself there. You clearly see that he still identifies correctly that he shouldn't be there. He was indeed stolen from the land of the Hebrews. That's what my translation says. Yours said something different.
I want to point out the difference in how you and I are approaching this story. Because it's just becoming more and more clear to me that you're approaching this like from a very personal perspective. Like, this is probably not what is just going through Joseph's mind, or this is probably not how he's seeing it, or this is how he's seeing things. Whereas I come at this story from a more third person point of view and trying to draw out these concepts that paints this picture or draws this map of the universe, of how this narrative is reflecting the map of the world. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that we are approaching this from a very different perspective, which I think makes this conversation very enriched. So
yeah, it does. Well, thank you. That's it. I think you're probably spot on. But I guess that's just how I get there. I think I see the sort of empathetic lens as the reason that this is put into a narrative like this, and looking at it as a mythology. The whole point of a hero is that they're kind of beyond empathy, right? Like they're superhuman, and and so maybe I try to see if is Joseph really this sort of epic hero, or is he really just like us? But I think through that it shows me the roadmap that he saw, and that's just another thing to get out of the story. How you can kind of look back through his actions to see what did the universe look like to Joseph, or to the writer who's telling us about choosing what to tell us about Joseph. So that's interesting. So I guess we move forward trying to paint a picture of what universe is being described here and what its machinations are. So back to kind of clothing as his role. So he shaved himself and he changed his clothes and he came in before Pharaoh. So he goes into even more detail about this dream than we read just before when he tells it to Joseph. Now, this time, it's one interpretation for both dreams, whereas the last time there was a pair, it was two different interpretations. And the cupbearer specifically said it happened according to his interpretation, each to their own dream. Right? But these are the same.
But we are seeing a reflection of the previous two dreams.
Very much.
Like, it was felt foreshadowed.
Yep.
And now we're seeing them come together. Like literally speaking, the cupbearer and the baker were personifications of what Pharaoh is experiencing here. It's like imagine Pharaoh's dreams and his experience being one thing, and those two extremes were extracted and made into the figures of the cupbearer and the baker and their dreams. So that's how I'm seeing it.
Yeah. So the first dream in the pair, what was the dream that Joseph had? Was it the moon and stars?
No, it was the wheat.
That was the first dream.
And then the second dream was the moon and stars.
So we've got wheat showing up in each pair, and then we've got moon and stars, we have wine, we have cows.
Which now, hold on to that thought, but before I forget, because it just hit me, like, now in retrospect, or in hindsight, the first dream was about wheat, food related, and the second is about moon and stars, divinity, or royalty. So again, we are seeing the climax of Joseph's story encapsulated in those two dreams.
Yeah, that's true. But that is true. In this instance, Pharaoh's dream is pretty literal, because when you're talking about prosperity and famine, beef and grain, that's where it's at for these people, you know? So I think it's, even the subject matter is pretty spot on.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think there's maybe something I want to hang on to with that wheat motif.
What do you think is going on there?
I just think we'll see it again where we don't expect it.
Oh, okay. I see you. All right. So, verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh that what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years." Again, perfection or totality. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. Quick note. So forgotten is in modern colloquial use, we wouldn't use the word forgotten here, but I think it's a interesting point, because coming back to the word remember, to make a member again, so to make real, whereas the opposite of that, forgotten, is not that we forget it in the sense of not being in consciousness anymore, but forgot as in it's no longer a reality.
Right, like the famine will be so bad, it will be just as if the prosperity never happened.
Right, so it's dismembered. So it's not a remember, it's a dismemberment. So that's how I think the word forgotten is being used here.
Okay.
The abundance of Egypt will be dismembered. Let's put it that way. And famine will ravage, undone, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter had been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So double means like there's a stamp on it.
Right.
And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. Let's pause there for now.
One thing I forgot to mention from before. The cupbearer and the baker, they said, "There was no one here to interpret our dreams." And Pharaoh, even though he had all the wise men of Egypt come to listen to him, says the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting, I think, when we encounter the divine, status doesn't matter. We're all powerless before God. It doesn't matter what sort of wisdom or riches or power you have access to, or if you're in prison in your cell by yourself. You know, we're all at the mercy of God alone, and humbled before him. Right?
And here we see God's message come through a slave or prisoner, which psychologically is also is fascinating, because it could be this idea that it had to come through a humble source, because there could be a concern that coming through any vessel of power or significance or reputation could corrupt the purity of that message or the essence of that message. And
I don't think any of these wise men would be brave enough to say to Pharaoh what Joseph said.
Probably
about
not.
The severity of the famine.
But yeah, very true. But from just like as an abstraction, the truth has to come through an empty vessel. Let's put it that way. And we can say the same thing about our observation of the incarnation, that it had to come through a humble source or a humble means. Because any other way would probably introduce disruption or distortion. Yeah. Maybe.
I think that's true. Now, also, you mentioned the Nile being so important for the Egyptian concept of divinity. So it's interesting that Joseph says God will bring this about. He's showing you what he is about to do. He's the one controlling this prosperity, this famine. I think Pharaoh would have grasped that, maybe not understanding exactly who this God is, but at least in those terms, I think that would make sense to him with those dreams. He would say, yes, of course, these cows coming up from the Nile means that God or the gods are bringing this about. So there's a symbolism that I think you caught on to that probably is Joseph is working with here to kind of, make it convincing and understandable. Yeah, the doubling of Pharaoh's dreams, the thing is fixed by God. So again, he kind of is not claiming to be the source of any of this information. Definitely not the source of the events about to transpire. But it's all centered around kind of who this is coming from.
Why do you think this was happening? Like, why would God be bringing this upon Egypt?
Well, actually, it came upon everywhere, as we'll see shortly.
Right. Everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Everywhere. Well, could it be a second flood? And Egypt is the ark.
Yeah.
Again,
it's not the last time we'll hear
pre-Christ.
that symbolism. Pre-Christ, pre-Moses.
Post-Moses.
Well,
sorry.
Moses in the basket
Post-Noah,
is kind of like an ark.
Pre-Moses.
But yeah, So that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, and God works this whole situation to essentially the benefit of his people.
Okay, can I approach this from both mythological and psychological lens? So
not at the same time, it's too confusing.
No, I'll do it both at the same time.
He's double wielding people.
Coming back to the point we made about the totality of life and death, 7 years, life and death, order and chaos. So, mythologically, it's just these two entities of order and chaos clashing, coming together. So if I approach this, look at this from that lens as a ancient myth, I'm seeing this dramatization of order and chaos in its pure forms come together in a battle. And the question is, what's the hero gonna do? Now, psychologically, this is where it comes in, where we come in, is we experience that all the time. We experience this wave after wave of order and chaos. We go up and down, similar to the down and up that Joseph was experiencing. It was going through the ups and downs of life, order and chaos. He finds himself in places of prosperity and flourishing when everything is going well, where he put everything in its proper place. But chaos always has a way of breaking in. And we experience that all the time. Like, even as we do our best to put our lives in order, put our house in order, chaos always has a way of breaking in. And the question is, how do we navigate that? Because we are the thing that is navigating between order and chaos. We are not order and we are not chaos. We are the thing in between that's navigating between the two. And the question is, how do we do that well? How do we do that in a way that flourishes? And I think, in part, that is what this story is trying to answer as well. We already touched on how Joseph navigated that in his personal life. And now we're seeing it on the grand scale of the nation and the world. Is this dramatized, like this is very mythological, this dramatization of what's the word? The metaphysical. How are we going to see our hero navigate that?
We had talked about the hero's journey at some point.
We did.
So let's go back to that for a second. So Joseph is thrust onto this quest. He's sold to the Ishmaelites, and like it or not, he's off to Egypt. And when he gets there, he chooses to accept the quest, and he perseveres under the mentorship of Potiphar. And he learns how to manage this estate, and to the point where he even says, Potiphar isn't even greater in his own house than I am. You know, basically he's taught me everything he can. You know, I'm running this house as much as this whole household as much as he is. And then he lost Potiphar, and almost like his mentor died, right? So he's sent to prison to face a trial thereafter.
A pattern that we see in the hero's journey is that the mentor has to leave the hero alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Joseph is in prison for years. And then when he gets this chance to kind of step up and be the champion, you totally see this house manager in his words. He just scales it up. He's like, all right, people, I know how to manage a house. This is what we're going to do. We need to appoint people. We need to manage stuff. We need to divvy up the grain. We need to store 1/5 of it for each year. We need to distribute it, you know. And he just goes into like household management mode.
Who is this guy who thinks he can advise Pharaoh?
Yeah. Well, who is this guy? He's the guy who managed Potiphar's house for, like 12 years. So it's so fascinating to look at it from that perspective. You mentioned him as a hero. I think we can fit that bill. I think all the pieces are there.
This is a hero's journey.
Yeah, and you see him stepping up as kind of like this training that what the mentor taught me, I'm now going to implement in the moment of need, right? So he like steps up and gets it done. I mean, I definitely think the way that Joseph gives this advice as like an appendix to his interpretation of the dream, I think it is coming from the Lord as well. But I think as a mythology, he kind of fits that hero's quest.
All right, people.
Yeah.
Now he manages a nation.
Exactly. Like not
right.
a big step up, but really you're like, I can kind of see that. So yeah, but psychologically, you're talking about he experiences these waves. I think what he's looking at as well in terms of preparation is that Egypt is about to experience these waves. And he's like, oh, I've done this myself. I can tell you, like I've been through repeated times of need interspersed with times of prosperity. So let me tell you, from someone just coming from 2 years of a sort of destitution, I know how to prepare. I'm sure he's sitting in prison thinking, I'm going to get personal again. I'm sure he's sitting in prison thinking to myself, oh, I had so much bread in Potiphar's house. If only I had just like set aside a loaf every day, maybe like 1/5 of my bread. No, like, maybe it wasn't that specific, but I'm sure he's sitting there in his cell thinking, I would have, if only there was a way that I could have like saved up the excess that I had at that time and I had it available to me now. I mean, those thoughts cross your mind when when you look back and you miss sort of what you had when you're in this setting where you've got nothing. So you see him grasping for what he had. Right? He had influence in Potiphar's house. He has he gains influence under the prison warden, and he kind of looks back to continuing to develop those skills along the way. So in a sense, you see him stringing together these pieces to form one continuous journey, but he definitely experiences and observes these waves of ups and downs. And so when he's telling Pharaoh, Egypt is about to get a big up and a big down, as a matter of fact, I can talk you through that. And do you think that he's thinking of himself when he's like, you should appoint someone who, discerning and wise?
Who knows? Maybe he was tongue in cheek, like nudge, nudge. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's speculation. I don't really see that in here, but you gotta wonder. Maybe he didn't consider himself to be what are his words? A discerning and wise man. Maybe he was talking about one of the other wise men that had failed to give him the interpretation. I don't know. But but he's like, let me, he just tells Pharaoh, this is what you need to do.
So tell me, what do you think Joseph must have been feeling and thinking as he is now in Pharaoh's court? Now advising the highest man in the nation, who is in that culture, God himself.
So here's the thing. He had his two buddies that he sent up to Pharaoh. One of them prospered greatly and one of them died. I think that's a great example of the classic stakes involved in coming before the king. So he's a man of no status, right? The king says, I don't like what you have to say, off with his head. That's that. Nobody weeps for him. Maybe the prison warden, because he's got to find another right-hand man, but other than that, he's of no status. And I know we talked about his changing clothes as kind of a maybe like a precursor, like ramping up to the change that's about to happen. But I also think there's this element where it was like a humbling thing, right? Joseph has no status of his own to bring before the king, so the king extends some to him, right? It's like, we're gonna get you cleaned up, we're gonna get you shaved, we're gonna get you some clothes. Because I don't want to look at you like all prison, filthy, gross. I don't want that in my court. So he's feeling out of place. He feels like a foreigner. He's literally in a foreign land. He's been in prison for 2 years, right? Even at his highest status, he was never in the court of a king.
If there's any time to have imposter syndrome, it's now.
Oh man, imposter syndrome, big time. I don't know if he felt that exactly. So he's afraid. Definitely part of him is afraid. Because for one thing, this is his shot. This is his one chance. So he's like, this is my ticket out of here. If I do this right, this could be my big moment, my escape out of this pit. That's what he asked the baker for 2 years ago. And he's finally got it. He probably had lost hope, so it's unexpected. And he's like caught off guard. But when he is thinking to himself, I better do this right, he still has a hierarchy that's beyond. He's not thinking, I just got to schmooze this guy. If I tell him just what he wants to hear, if I spin this just right, I might be able to work this for myself. That's not what he's thinking, apparently, because he doesn't miss a beat when it comes to just being himself, being who we've seen him be up to this point, right? So, I think in one sense, he's thinking, this is my shot out of here. I can't mess this up. And then the other thing is, like, if I do mess this up, I'm going down for good. Like, this is a do or die moment. So he doesn't really have a choice. He's got to go through it the best he can. Also, he's used to injustice as well. So he might be thinking, he might just be like, well, whatever, I'm just going to do.
Couldn't get any worse than this.
Yeah, just going to do the best I can. And I mean, he's probably going to end up killing me anyways.
What kind of person would seek to help the people who had caused him so much suffering?
Well, like it or not, he's one of them now. I mean, he's got no way out.
Maybe.
So if he sees in Pharaoh's dream...
But maybe he was perfectly willing to go down with the ship. And that is what people who have let bitterness and resentment overtake them become. When you let bitterness just consume you and you start to resent and hate those people who caused you harm and pain, there comes a point where you just want to watch the world burn even if you die with them.
Right.
And that's what some shooters do. They're willing to die. They're throwing away their lives because they're so resentful towards the world, and they're totally willing to die with them. I would take everyone down with me.
Right.
And so Joseph could have been in that position if he let himself fall into that.
He was willing to starve in prison 7 years from now. But you're right. And what we see in his resilience is that he never shirks his sense of responsibility. And I think that goes back to his hierarchy. He understands that God is sovereign over all these things, these good things and these bad things. And he does not ever claim to understand why this happened to him. He also has a very good memory, though. So he knows that God is sovereign. He sees himself as God's servant. But you never see him really withhold respect from anybody for being beneath him. So even but he holds that with a clear memory of what's happened to him. So he understands that it was his brothers that betrayed him. He remembers that. He remembers it was Potiphar's wife who unjustly had him put in prison, turned Potiphar against him. And you see that he remembers these things, but he doesn't generalize them. He doesn't say, you know what, this is Egypt's fault. This is Pharaoh's fault. Let all the people of Egypt suffer. He doesn't give in to that sort of bitterness to start attributing guilt to people that really didn't directly wrong him.
Which is an easy thing to do, to generalize.
Yes, so
to generalize guilt and fault
right,
like
so
that.
that you're saying he doesn't give in to that bitterness and that resentment. And I think that's because he holds that proper placement of priorities so clearly. I mean, and that's the secret. Like, how did he do that? I mean, he's some kind of
what is
superhuman
the antidote to bitterness?
So, humility. Despite his recognition of the injustice committed against him, he's never entitled. He's not saying to himself, you never see him asking God, how could you let this happen? He humbles himself before God as the sovereign. And he understands that somehow this is taking me to the center of the circle, right? All these twists and turns are getting me closer to the center. He just chooses to acknowledge that, and it's out of this sort of surrender, I think, for this surrender to God's sovereignty. He knows God's goodness, God's faithfulness somehow, and he must be clinging to that because you see him with this very vibrant relationship with God. He relies on him. He attributes him honor and wisdom and knowledge and complete sovereignty. He never speaks bitterly about God. And so the two things are, God is sovereign first and foremost. He's in control. So whatever people do to me, they're only doing what God has allowed them to do. So that's the one thing. Um, and then the other thing is knowing who this God is. So not only is he sovereign, but what is he like? He's good. He's faithful. And so even though these other people have committed injustice to me, God allowed that to happen because he's taking me somewhere better through these events. And so there's no reason to resent those people. There's no reason to be bitter because their malice is being subverted. And he, despite all of this, will basically receive his birthright regardless.
So humility is the antidote to bitterness.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson would say that the antidote to bitterness is gratefulness.
Yeah, everyone likes to say that. So if you want to approach it psychologically, yeah, and there are lots of spiritual disciplines and mindfulness practices around being grateful. If you look at a tiger, and someone asks you, is that an orange cat with black stripes or a black cat with orange stripes? To answer either of those questions, you have to look at the tiger. So you can be bitter or you can be grateful, but you're still just examining the circumstances.
Right.
Joseph sees beyond that. So it's beyond gratefulness. He sees through the circumstances. Gratefulness is still rooted in circumstance. The same way that bitterness is. They're two sides of the same coin. So, but he removes his focus from that entirely and says, you know what? These circumstances aren't the important thing happening here. What I'm concerned about is where is God taking me? And that doesn't change throughout this whole thing. And he recognizes that because of his humility, because he properly places himself within this hierarchy of beyond the circumstance. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So modern psychology does not see beyond. It's not meant to. It doesn't want to. It's not equipped to. So yeah, it's going to tell you the antidote to bitterness is gratefulness. That's just looking at a half-empty glass and calling it half full, essentially, psychologically. It's just a change in perspective, but it's looking at the same thing. Different perspective, same object.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Joseph is concerned not with circumstances. So he doesn't just need a change in perspective. He needs a change in focus.
So looking beyond, it seems to me that you have something specific in mind. Is that, what is that? Spiritual?
Specifically, it's a promise. It's faith. It's faith in God and his promises. So God, this is, Joseph serves the God of his forefathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of his father Jacob. And if you look through the previous chapters of this book, you build a pretty impressive resume of faithfulness, of compassion, of personal involvement. I mean, Joseph doesn't see God in the way that our culture today does. He's not the guy in the sky.
He didn't know who God was.
Joseph? Do we?
He knew less of who God was or what he was than we do.
He knew less about God, but he knew God.
Yes,
See the difference?
Yes.
Yeah.
I see the difference.
Humans are meant for relationship. In a sense, that's stronger than gratefulness. Is a healthy relationship. People can endure all kinds of stuff with someone beside them. So actually, studies show that you can endure like a painful stimulus, like which in psychology research is almost always like putting your hand in ice water. It's like the most sort of humane or ethical form of inducing pain experimentally. So
Weak.
you can keep it hurts after a while. You can actually keep your hand in a bucket of ice water twice as long if someone else is holding your other hand than if you're by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So the relationship is a very powerful, has very powerful staying power. It's very stabilizing, very strengthening, very endurant. So when Joseph sees beyond, what he's seeing is not what he knows of God, but who he knows God to be, and the fact that they're close. No one can say. I mean, you could jeer at Joseph down to him in his prison cell and say, "You goofed up, man. You shouldn't have messed with Potiphar's wife." And you can spew lies about him or malice on him or egg him on, and I'm sure that was done at some point. But what you can't say is, you've lost connection to your God. He's not going to believe that. Nobody knows better than he does. But they're closer than ever. He's down there in that prison cell, digging holes in the floor with his knees hidden every time he goes down to pray. Getting a little off in the weeds here. Let me try and bring it back. So seeing beyond is this intertwining of faith in what's been promised because of who the promise comes from in your relationship to that person. So he knows God and he's leaning on God. He has been for this whole experience, right? So you see that when he gets his big shot before Pharaoh. He lets nobody make the mistake of saying that, "Oh, Joseph, you're going to climb out of this pit of your own powers." No. God, who's been with me this whole time, he's my best friend, my greatest ally, my source of strength. He's the one who's going to be interpreting this dream for us today.
The other thing that they found helps people endure pain is music. Why? Well, music. Well, music is the dance of order and chaos. And two, music livens the spirit but not just livens the spirit, it draws the spirit into a transcendent place. So, I mean, when you are a Navy SEAL at 3:00 in the morning, wading in icy cold waters with your buds, and you start singing, the music helps you lift you out of your present experience, of your tangible experience. And now your focus is on your spirit, which we can call the spiritual realm, like this higher plane where you are less conscious of the concrete empirical experience, and you are more focused on the plane that you are riding, that your spirit is riding on. And so what helps us push through times of darkness and times of suffering is elevating ourselves to that plane, taking ourselves out of the empirical into the larger picture.
Yeah, but it's hard to do and it takes practice.
Definitely.
So you can't.
And we can say that. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to say, I mean, Joseph clearly, it's not an off and on thing with he and God. He spent this whole time practicing.
We can say that meditation helps us do that to some extent too.
meditation's a practice, a discipline. You have to practice it, and the more you do it, the better you get. Yeah, and that the whole point is to kind of elevate your focus into a higher plane. Psychologically, music is very stimulating. It regulates your breathing. You're thinking about, you're feeling the air and the words come out. You're also hearing them. So
it affects your water molecules.
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, it affects everything. So, and then also you're not thinking about the time that's passing with your pain. You're thinking about the rhythm of the music. That's like
right. And so you're syncing, like you're literally, your body is syncing. The water molecules in your body is syncing with the music.
Right. So it's like it's kind of like a distraction in a lot of ways, and as it kind of
but it is bringing you in this state of harmony.
Mm-hmm. And harmony, if you're singing with a group of people, it's like unifying, right? So like it reminds you of like a common purpose. Song is long been used to kind of coordinate people.
And so what music can do is it harmonizes us in states of disorder. Mm-hmm. When we are psychologically fragmented and disordered, music helps put us back together.
It's very focusing. Yeah. So I like how you said
and it does that on a societal level as well.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I like how you said it's the dance between order and chaos. That's
it is literally really is. It's not order, because if it's too orderly, it's robotic. It's like
I've heard music that's pretty much pure chaos before.
and then we have if music is too orderly, it's robotic. If it's too chaotic, it's not beautiful.
It's true.
It has to dance in that line, flirting with that line between order and chaos, and that is where life is found. And that's what we have to do as well. This is what this story is all about.
Right. And Joseph, in interpreting these dreams, is a divine the interpretation of dreams is a divine act, because you are extracting order from chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're finding order in what appears to be chaos.
You are extracting conscious articulation from the unconscious or subconscious expression of whatever it is, reality, truth.
But you can't. So like Pharaoh can't put reason to this dream. He has this dream twice. He talks to all these people. No one can figure out what it means. So Joseph pulls meaning out of it. So it's commanding the order to show itself, to come forth from the chaos. So it's it has to be, he has to attribute that to the God who gives him those interpretations, because it is the divine act itself.
Right. And God is the spirit that guides us on that line, that dancing line between order and chaos.
Right. Yeah. So an understanding that hierarchy is kind of what keeps him anchored through all this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, when he comes before Pharaoh, he has no way of knowing how this is going to end.
No.
Right. But he's not focused on circumstances. So he's not shaken. He just continues right on being who we've seen him be every time he opens his mouth.
And there's a lesson there. We've also been looking at the story of the prophets. And Joseph is a very good example. Let me say it this way. We've been looking at the story of the prophets, and to me, the story of the prophets is a story of people who received the truth and dared to say it and stick to their guns. Mm-hmm. And Joseph, being this prophetic figure in this story, also exemplifies the same spirit, that he has received revelation, he has received truth, and he has something to say. The question is, are you going to say it? And in a sense, you have a duty to do that. Mm-hmm. And so he's this very forthright, straightforward figure. Like, I'm going to say what needs to be said. And I'm not going to play any games around it.
Right.
And that, we could say, that is the right way to navigate life. To honestly navigate the labyrinth. To be forthright. To say what you have to say and follow the pay attention to the thing that reveals itself to you and follow that to the best of your ability. That's your best option.
Maybe that's the reason why Jesus grouped these three things when he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. Like the straight path is truth. And in that lies life.
In that lies life.
And the tough edge of that blade is when you tell the truth. So that is the dance between order and chaos. When you proclaim order, you attract chaos. And so you have to be, if you're going to commit, Nathaniel, to a life of telling the truth as you have received it and sticking to your guns, then just be ready that that results in a very unpredictable order of circumstances.
Because the truth leads you into uncharted waters.
Yeah. And it leads you along a labyrinth where you can't immediately see where it's headed. Right. So things will start to change around you in ways that you can't control or predict. And because so that's why people don't do it, because it's scary.
Right. Because
if you're focused on the circumstances.
Exactly. If you focus on the circumstances. Because order is the world that you have made around yourself. It's what's familiar. The truth necessarily has to include everything outside of that. So if you honestly pursue the truth, you have to be willing to step out of your ordered world. And that is an adventure.
Yeah, that's an understatement. An adventure. And he calls himself a pessimist, people. Can you believe that?
All right. We spent a lot of time on that one.
Well, there's a lot there. This is a great discussion.
So I think we can try to finish the chapter. So verse 37. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Quick note. When it says, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?"
I was going to say this, yeah. I saw that.
There's a footnote that says it could be read as one in whom is the spirit of the gods. So to Pharaoh, he is still speaking from this polytheistic framework.
He's not like an instant convert.
Instant convert. Not like that guy to whom I think Luke or Paul was talking.
Right.
Right. So 41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." So again, we're seeing Joseph was put in charge of a house, then a jail, and now the whole land of Egypt.
Oh yeah, and he says, "Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." So we see again where he's given everything except one thing, but he's already proven that he has the restraint to keep those boundaries, right? Because that was the temptation of Potiphar's wife, was will you reach out your hand and take the one thing that will confuse you with where your authority comes from.
You could say that he was repairing the sin of Eden.
Exactly. Right. So yeah, because he's withholding his hand from taking the one thing that he's not given power to do. Also, maybe this helps answer the question of how he was able to constantly maintain his humility before God. It's just that the one thing in that instance where, God has given him all this favor, these divine interpretations, the one thing that is still owed to God alone is the credit for all this.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph does not withhold that from him in the same vein. So he's
That's
so
the one
consistent.
thing he can't take.
The one thing that he won't take. So he's so consistent. So it's interesting that
Very
Pharaoh
true.
just hands this over to him, and only in regards to the throne. And you're talking about, how easy would be to become a tyrant, but we don't have to worry. As the readers, we're like, this works because we already know he's up to the job. He's not going to falter.
All right. Put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. That's what I was talking about the reversal of ripping his robes off. And now he is adorned with robes of fine linen. He had him ride in the chariot as his second in command. And people shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Okay, let's pause that for now.
He's finally free.
He's no longer a doggo.
But okay, that's you. But not just is he free, he is like the greatest in the whole kingdom. So this is where it finally paid. I'm so excited for you, Joseph. It's finally paid off. He has seen this whole time this is going somewhere. He did not manipulate his circumstances because he knew God was bringing him somewhere better than what he could have achieved on his own, and now it's happened. It's finally paid off.
Also, it's funny that this section follows the trope of the hero getting the girl after slaying the dragon.
And a dope name.
Zephanath-Paneah. He didn't tell us what he meant.
It usually does.
Well, we'll have to do some research on what he meant, but...
Well, I don't know if ancient Egyptian names were documented.
So Joseph got the gold. But going back to the robe, now he's placed robes of fine linen. So now the robe signifies honor and favor. Yeah.
Yep. So how is this different from the last time where Pharaoh put robes on him or put clothes on him?
Oh, let's go through all the times we've seen robes so far. So his first one was signified, it could signify innocence. It also signifies divinity and royalty. So very prophetic there. It defined his role. And then that was stripped off of him. And then he was given a robe of a slave. That was stripped off of him. And then we see another robe of renewal, of a new chapter in his life put on him as he entered Pharaoh's court. And now we see the ultimate. So robes of fine linen, we could interpret this as Coat of Colors 2.0. That now this is a more mature version of that, right? So it's...
This time with a gold chain.
With a gold...
Like a rapper.
Whoa, he's a top
He's
dog.
got some bling.
Top dog right here. I would interpret this as the matured version of the robe of many colors. It's the same idea. The promise is still there. The identity is still there, but he had to go through the maturation process. And now he's getting it back.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's not just the same thing back. It's better than it was before.
Right.
It's like if he had started out with this coat of many colors and nothing bad had happened to him, maybe he would be in a greater place of prominence than when he started, 13, 15 years ago. But it's like it's matured while it was away from him. It was stripped from him. It was dipped in blood. It was forgotten.
and then the next time we see it, it's put on him by someone that's even greater.
Had to be dipped in blood.
And he went through that trial. But he, even if he didn't know the details of like exactly what it was going to look like, he knew somehow he was able to hold in his heart that all of these twists and turns were going to lead him to the center of the circle. We're talking about as a labyrinth, or like, going down and then bouncing back up is basically just one journey up. Like he saw it. I'm just so stoked for Joseph.
Not to get us too off topic, but I also see this as, it's the same thing. Eden and the New Jerusalem.
Yep. That's
where
I'm going.
The promise is the same. The identity is the same, but we're not meant to stay in Eden.
Right.
And we're not meant to go back to Eden.
No, it's more mature.
Right. So anyway, not to get
more
off on
glorified.
that whole conversation.
Yeah.
But even Eden had to be dipped in blood. And it had to go through many iterations. Garden after garden.
So what point in the hero's quest is this?
Good question, because it doesn't fit perfectly in every plot point, because so one thing one thing I learned in film school was that we had the 3-act structure, which is basically a hero's journey in a sense, but that's the most basic form of it. Sometimes there are some movies that has mini, like sub 3-act structures within the larger 3-act structure. And sometimes there are 2 climaxes in a movie. And so this is kind of similar to that, where we see the overarching hero's journey, but we also see that there are sub arcs as well. So there are 2 climaxes in the movie in this story as well. There are 2 deaths in this story as well. One being Joseph's personal death in prison, and 2, we're gonna see the climax for the nation, the death of the nation as well. So it's not a perfect fit, but we're seeing the same patterns over and over again.
So,
but
yeah,
it's for Joseph's personal story, this is his resurrection point.
Yes. But it's not like a happily ever after yet, because he knows that there's 7 years of horrible famine still coming. So the question is this going to ruin him, or is he still going to be who we've known him to be?
Right.
Like can his character that's been forged in these trials of hardships, can they endure the prosperity through to the next hardship? Right. That's the question for us as ones who are entertained by this story. And you mentioned he does get the girl.
And this is like, we see Joseph take on responsibility after responsibility. And now this is a chance for him to take on the ultimate responsibility, or the largest scale of all.
Any symbolism in the fact that he marries the daughter of Potiphar?
Coincidence? I think not. Potiphar.
This a little
on the nose there.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoever wrote this, Moses. Whoever wrote this.
Yep.
Yes. So that's funny. Priest of On. I wonder who On is. I need to do some research on this Egyptian god.
I don't know much about Egyptian religion,
right?
Or language, apparently.
Well,
I don't know if you saw that, but when it says they called out before him, bow the knee. That bow the knee is some random 2-syllable word that they don't think is Hebrew. It's probably like Egyptian, but it sounds like similar to the Hebrew word for kneel.
Hebrew word for kneel.
Kneel. Huh. So it's translated here in my Bible, bow the knee.
Well,
but they're like, it's probably the Egyptian word for that.
But it means similar things.
Well, it sounds, all it says here is that it sounds like the Hebrew word for kneel, but it's not Hebrew. They think it's probably the Egyptian word. So
I wouldn't be surprised if it's similar, because ancient Hebrew as we know it kind of originated in Egypt. Right. There's 400 years. So for any of us who learn languages, 400 years of languages being next to each other. it's bound to be what's the word?
Fertilization.
Sure, cross-fertilization.
Cross-pollination.
Cross-pollination of words and meanings. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Egyptian word used here and the Hebrew word that they're referring to, experience that crossover.
Right. So, but he's as Egyptian as it gets now. He's going through the land of Egypt. People are yelling in Egyptian, bow the knee. He has this epic name, Zaphanath Paneah. He marries this Egyptian woman, daughter of a priest, nonetheless. That could have religious implications. So, and I think you had mentioned we might see a little touch of polytheism from Joseph later. So that's spicy, but we'll get to that later. All right.
Yeah.
So now that he's like bona fide Egyptian, high status, resurrection mode, what happens next?
Well, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. So this is 13 years after the story began. Yeah. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. So this is again, number 7, the perfect, ultimate totality of life and abundance. So how it was contrasted with how they described the totality of chaos and death. It's so terrible that it would life would be forgotten. And now we're seeing contrasted the same kind of language. Like it was so abundant that he stopped keeping records, that he couldn't keep count. So it's kind of emphasizing that. Verse 50, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second, Manasseh means forget. The second son, he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Ephraim means twice as fruitful. Fruitful in the land of my suffering. There's a lot there. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere.
So again, Joseph maintains his sense of responsibility. He's made it. He's gotten to this incredible place in his life to where he forgot his hardship and his father's household who betrayed him. But he doesn't forget why he's there. So he gets to work. He goes throughout all Egypt. He leaves Pharaoh's presence and he starts stacking grain. Now, if we want to talk about symbolism, I don't think we can bypass the fact that he stored grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, where we heard that before.
Like the stars in the sky.
Right. So the offspring promised to his great-grandfather, Abraham, he would be the father of great nations and have descendants like the sand of the seashore. They would be innumerable like the sand of the seashore. So, I mean, probably this is just an idiom that is applicable twice, but more than that, agriculture and procreation were very linked in the mind of an ancient Near Eastern listener.
Because they use the word fertility for both.
So I think it's no mistake that Joseph, who we're seeing as sort of the spiritual continuer or recipient of the promise, in sort of in the spiritual lineage of Abraham, right? And under his caretaking, the grain which is his province, right? His task, almost like his household or his I'm not trying to say that the grain of Egypt was like his children, but in a sense that was like his responsibility, almost like his family. And so you see that like under his caretaking, he produces, beyond measure. Almost like kind of a spiritual,
like a spiritual fulfillment
of that kind of promise.
Spiritual fulfillment of that promise. Yeah.
In a way, and just in the sense that he's faithful to his responsibility, and that's kind of the way that he's blessed for that.
Now, children is a very significant element in any biblical story.
Really?
Oh.
Sorry. No,
I know.
It's true.
So let's talk about his children.
2 sons.
Manasseh means to forget. And, he said, to forget all my troubles in my father's household. It doesn't mean to cognitively not remember. It is to make it effectively non-existent to me. All my trouble has been gone.
Right. So he's okay at this point being an Egyptian.
Yeah.
He doesn't really feel tied to the Hebrews anymore.
Yeah, he got his green card.
That cuts deep, doesn't it?
Oh. But yes,
we believe blessing is coming.
He's being coupled and we see this echoed in Isaiah, for the exiles. The spirit of seek the blessing of the land in which you dwell. Seek the blessing of your captors. That's what Joseph did. Every step of the way. He took responsibility for the people around him, no matter how terrible they were to him.
But once again, why did he feel so motivated to continue that responsibility? Like with Potiphar, he made it very clear from the beginning that it was the Lord's favor allowing him to do this. So it wasn't his reputation on the line. He was basically publicly a servant of his God. And with God being his sovereign priority in his hierarchy, he now was no time to rest. Even though he'd made it, he had all the comforts he could have ever asked for. I'm sure he was, after 2 years in prison, he was more than comfortable where he was at. But he didn't stop there because it wasn't about him. Right? So the way that in Potiphar's house, he blessed Potiphar because of God's favor on him.
Right.
He said from the first time that he saw Pharaoh, whatever is about to come out of my mouth is from God and not from me. So now that he's benefited from that, he kind of keeps that in mind.
Yeah.
So success did not ruin him. He maintains his faithfulness. He continues to see beyond, and he works hard.
He does. So Manasseh
But
means...
anyways, yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. That's good.
Back to children. Yeah.
Children. God has made me forget my trouble. And the second son, Ephraim, means to be fruitful. It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. It's very profound, this idea of being fruitful in a land of suffering. And if I may, it reminds me of Psalm 84. How is it? How lovely is your dwelling place. Some of us are familiar with this psalm. How lovely is your dwelling place, my soul yearns, even faints for the courts of my Lord. And it's this the psalmist, not David. The psalmist is expressing this desire to dwell in the presence of God, to dwell in the house of the living God. And in verse 5, starting in verse 5, blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage as they pass through the valley of Baca, the valley of tears, I think that's what it means, or the valley of sorrow, or the valley of bitterness, I think that's what it means. They make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. They go from strength to strength. It's this idea that the one who dwells in the presence of God turns the dry places into springs. And, blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. And I was thinking about that. Hearts are set on pilgrimage. What does that mean? Why pilgrimage? Well, pilgrimage is your journey to the holy city. Not just a holy city, but to the holy temple. Whose hearts are set on pilgrimage means that your desire is to orient yourself on the path to the temple of the Lord. In other words, aka, orienting yourself towards the presence of God, towards the thing, the transcendent, I'll put it that way. So it's an orientation, it's on the path, it's a journey, it's the labyrinth, right? So it is those people who set their eyes above, who set their eyes, who literally just shape their life on a path towards that North Star. I like using that term. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who turn deserts into springs. And that is what Joseph is trying to say in his second son.
With the name.
With his first son, his firstborn, his first fruits, he is saying, I have forgotten my suffering. And with his second, it's a double blessing. Again, we're seeing a pattern of two.
A pattern of two.
Pattern of two. With his second, he's saying, not just have I forgotten my suffering, I am now doubly fruitful, even in the place of my suffering. Mm-hmm. Right.
Before.
So it's kind of like his first son is like paying off the debts of his suffering. Like, now I have forgotten it. Like the debts are paid. And then with his second son, it's, this is just more than, like, he is seeing the entire suffering of his life restored.
Mm-hmm. Also, it's his own thing. I mean, at this point, yes, he has all this authority, but he's really only ever had what's been given to him, right? He only has authority by extension, even of his father, then of Potiphar, and now of Pharaoh. But his own sons, those are his. So that's another essence in which it's like this fruitfulness that's very important to him. And I think naming your second born son twice fruitful is kind of like number two. Just naming him like, hey, it's a son numero dos.
Well, we're not seeing any fighting of twins here.
Right, no twins. We're done with that motif apparently. So yeah, Manasseh and Ephraim. And so the motif of the firstborn is set aside here a little bit. We didn't the whole subversion thing. We don't.
Oh, we're gonna see that later.
Yeah, but at least at this point where we're discussing their birth, it seems like all is well and usual for now.
Mm-hmm. All conventional for now.
For now. So stay tuned, because if we've learned anything so far, it's that it's not going to stay that way. So stay tuned, listeners.
And then Pharaoh would say, go to Joseph. Look, he is so comfortable, just like his two predecessors.
Yep.
So comfortable with Joseph. He's like, don't bother me with your problems. Go see that guy.
Yep.
Dude.
And he doesn't have to hike all the way to Dothan to find them. They are coming to him. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So he no longer looks ridiculous wandering out over the open country with his magnificent cloak. He's just sitting back and people are coming
And the
to him.
whole land of Egypt, not just the whole land of Egypt, the world came to Egypt. That's a powerful picture there. The world came to Egypt.
The people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Joseph, spread all over the land. He sold to the Egyptians.
Very economical.
Yeah, I mean, the government's got to make back some money.
Well,
The earth came to Joseph.
if that-
Buy grain.
if that interests you, then just wait for chapter 47, where we're gonna see an interesting episode with selling more grain. All right.
Was severe over all the earth. So it is kind of like he's turned Egypt into this ark of refuge. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, turn Egypt into the salvation of the world.
Interesting. You talk about bringing order out of chaos. So there's chaos in prosperity too, right? I think that's the whole point of
What kind?
the figure of Bacchus. He is the most chaotic source
Bacchus,
of order.
Dionysus, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay. Yeah, no.
If you
That's a
wanna talk
very
about
fascinating...
fat cows and innumerable. I mean, the grain was innumerable. How can you have order if you can't even keep track of it, right? So there's so much, excess. I mean, so the elements of prosperity that we've seen in these dreams are like we've got the grain, we've got the grapes, right? We've got the cows. So many apparently that it's turning to chaos. But Joseph orders the chaos, right? He's not just letting excess reign free. He's he's being disciplined like he has always been. He's setting aside some, saving it for later. He's keeping track. He's building storehouses. And then when the time is right, when the chaos pendulum swings the other way, he just continues the same order he's been maintaining this whole time. He is so steady despite drastic changes in circumstance.
That's the story of the flood. Order, creating a sustainable structure so that when chaos hits,
right,
you'll float. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Bacchus is pretty interesting. Bacchus appeared in the
Prince
Chronicles-
Caspian.
Prince Caspian. That's
There
just
was that little section right at the end where you, as a 7-year-old listening to the audiobook as you drift off to sleep at night, wonder what on earth is happening right now.
such a random cameo.
So weird. Yeah. That was one of those things where I always woke up the next morning and thought, was that actually part of that audiobook? Or was that like some weird dream that got mixed in with me listening as I was falling asleep? Yeah, and then I went back and read it later in middle school. Oh yeah, that was Bacchus. That's still weird.
Excess flourishing, excess life. No, that's
So the the golden mean here is not like, or the priority isn't just plenty. Right? The priority is
it's not
discipline.
It's not
and order.
frivolous, right? Because it's so natural for us when we receive a huge paycheck that we don't know what to do with.
Right.
I'm going there. People
End up downloading Horizon New may or may not be on sale this week. Not that that's important.
Totally not important, but
They'll pay me for that later.
but no, the point is
Horizon, if you want to or Epic Games, if you want to sponsor this
not by
episode,
Epic
are we accepting sponsorships?
sure.
Sure, we will accept your
Sure.
sponsorship.
Yes, as long as we keep our freedom of speech.
You can cut that out later. Fix that in post.
Should I cut that out? Anyway,
So
the point is.
the point being,
What? Where was I?
the point being is that there's when you get like this paycheck.
Oh yes, paycheck. So getting practical here, people who have not developed a habit and discipline of just ordering their life and having self-control, when they get that's deep. When they get a whole bunch of money, when they win the lottery, they have no system to keep it under control, and their shadow side comes out, and before they know it, the money's gone.
Well, and the pressure of dealing with that when you're not used to managing money is crippling. So actually winning the lottery is a huge risk factor for suicide.
Right, because then the money becomes the dragon of chaos. Right. So
But he is used to doing this. So we've seen that in Potiphar's house, the restraint was to not lay with Potiphar's wife. That was like he had all this excess, this plenty, this authority, this liberty, even as a slave. And, it's not worth splitting hairs over whether he would have gotten away with it or not, but he could have done it. He had the opportunity, but he did not avail himself of, right? He's not just out there to collect whatever's offered to him. He has other priorities. He sees a different hierarchy, and so he's disciplined.
Right.
So now that he has the ability to order the chaos around him, he orders his life towards his structure of priorities.
I'm building up to that. So
okay, sorry.
no, you're good. It's basically the same point. So on using concrete examples, when like money becoming the dragon of chaos. Another example is, so on a certain day I would pick up a whole bunch of letters from my mailbox and just dump it on the counter right here. And I wouldn't want to deal with it because it's chaos. It's like a microcosm of chaos right there that I don't want to deal with. If I make it a habit of not dealing with it and sweeping it under the rug,
collections.
I'll send it. Exactly. That's when the dragon gets too big to control, right? And so
your credit score gets too small to be useful. Exactly. It's not important how I know that.
But what I need to do is to develop to train the discipline of confronting microcosms of chaos in my own life. When I'm able to handle that, when I'm able to handle a stack of letters, I'll be able to handle slightly bigger things, and then slightly bigger things. I'll be able to handle larger amounts of money. And the idea that excess flourishing when you're not ready for it becomes a dragon of its own, that destroys people. And so money and wealth is not enough for someone's flourishing, which is why Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone. It's not like he's saying, look, Satan, you don't get the point. Because the temptation was making the point that all you need is bread. That's all you need, like base level of Maslow's hierarchy. That's all you need. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not, sorry, I need to face the camera. He's saying, no, that's not the point. Bread is not enough. You can have all the bread in the world, but if you do not have the thing that is more important, that bread will be your death. What's more important? Every word that comes out of the mouth of God. What is that? The hierarchy, right? That you order your life not by your immediate desires. You order
needs.
Or needs. You order your life by the ordering principle, the ordering spirit that structures your life, that puts everything in its rightful place.
Right.
And that's what Joseph did. It's and that's what allows him to handle the other things that is given to him.
Okay. Right. So I think that is in essence like seeing beyond. So what you're talking about is, I mean, you're talking about where the rubber hits the road, where you're hungry, you're starving, and you need sustenance. But the reason I say seeing beyond is because it's like it almost ignores the physical reality. We in the West, the modern West, we want to think that what's in front of us is like the thing we can see and observe and detect and record the most clearly must be the things that are the most true. Right? So if I can see it, then it's real. Like there's nothing realer than that. If I can feel it. So, you could look at Jesus being tempted in the desert and say, you need bread, Jesus. Like, yeah, the spiritual stuff is cool too, but I mean, let's face reality. You need to eat something. You're going to starve.
Mm-hmm.
It's seeing beyond is acknowledging, it's seeing through, seeing past what you're actually looking at, and not just seeing something in addition to it. It's not just, well, yeah, I need bread, but I need bread and the words from the mouth of God. It's seeing actually a truer reality than the one you can see with your eyes. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I picture it differently.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
How do you picture it?
I picture it as, yes, you need bread, but bread in its improper place is not helpful.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I understand right, you're making the point that our needs, but what we really need is beyond that.
Well, yeah. So
no, I understand.
Phrase it the way you're saying, on a worldly hierarchy, bread would be at the top.
Sure.
Well, or at the bottom.
Yeah.
Of like
the temptation
hierarchy.
is that bread is at the top. Yes.
But you're saying he sees a truer hierarchy and sees that the bread is not the most important. Yeah. So it's the same thing. Yeah. But yeah. So you're talking about it in terms of priorities, and I'm talking it more of like a visual. So maybe the analogy that I'm using is like in the Lego movie when he becomes a master builder, and then the master builders always have this phrase, "I see everything." Right? Morgan Freeman says it in a super epic voice. It's Vitruvius. I see everything, and then he gets lasered in the face. He's like, "My eyes," But then when Emmett is, okay, not to make this weird, but Emmett is kind of touched by like the hand of the man upstairs, right? So he's like kind of this ethereal, like this disembodied but all powerful hand that which turns out to be the kid playing with the Legos. So it's like when he's in the hands of the kid, he becomes a master builder and he sees what the kid sees. And so, but then it shows you through Emmett's eyes, and it visually looks differently, but it's like, he's like, oh, I get it now. Like, I see everything. You got to watch the movie, mostly because it's awesome, but secondly, because it'll help you understand this. So
you just say awesome because
everything is awesome. Thank you. Wow. We could, please, Lord save me. I go down a real rabbit hole here. So
go on.
I will restrain myself. I will exhibit discipline. I will see beyond. I will reprioritize. So we're done with the Lego movie. But that saying, like, Joseph looks, or Jesus looks at the bread, and it's not one of those Lego pieces that lights up to be, part of what he's trying to build. So he sees everything and well enough to know that the bread isn't an important player here. Like Joseph, when he's, so here's where this comes to Joseph. So when you're talking about, you're saying that he has excess in this time of plenty. As one who's managing the crop of the land of Egypt, right? He has excess. But he knows how to discipline himself.
How to order them.
Yes, he's had practice ordering smaller things, so he's ready for this big thing.
He's had practice slaying smaller dragons.
Okay, I like that. Yeah. So I would I want to approach it a different way. I'm not saying that what you said is not the case, but the way that I'm looking at it is, it's not just that he has plenty and he now knows what to do with plenty. I think the seeing beyond thing reaches into this to show us that he doesn't. We see it circumstantially, physically as plenty, but he didn't see it as plenty because he's seeing beyond to the 7 years of famine. He knows it's coming. On faith. He's received this truth from the Lord. And so he sees this massive storehouse of grain, and he doesn't say to himself, oh, I have so much to work with here. Let's just go crazy. He says, okay, I've got enough for now and I have enough for later. So let me separate them and organize them, right? So like that's his organization, is he doesn't see it as plenty. And I think that's to an extent like how you, that's, so we actually have a word for this. We've gotten practical enough now that we don't have to say seeing beyond. I can just call it foresight. Right? He sees specifically what's going to happen next, and so he plans accordingly. So yeah, so I think it's like this instance where in the same way with Potiphar's wife, he did not even consider that opportunity. He didn't say to himself, I have this opportunity before me, and all I have to decide is, do I take it or not? But in his mind, because he had a different hierarchy, it wasn't really an option ever at any point. It was just kind of a circumstance, another circumstance to ignore. You know, does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. Building on to that,
please do.
As I read the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis.
Oh boy, you're going for it.
There's this common theme that pops up in his meditations, and that is the idea of long-sightedness versus short-sightedness. And my takeaway from that observation is that the great, what word should I use here? Great weakness of mankind. No, I could even say the great sin of mankind is short-sightedness. And that seems to be what most, if not all, sins have in common. Like a short-sightedness that gives way to misaligned priorities, that basically immediate gratification, or I call it spiritual myopia, is that your picture of the world and reality is so small. And so what you're pointing to is that Joseph had this literal and spiritual long-sightedness.
Longevity of vision.
Right.
Exactly. Dude, you are about to launch off on something epic here. That'll preach, Nathaniel.
Cool. Take it away.
Spiritual myopia.
Spiritual myopia. That's a great weakness of humankind.
Yeah, and I think we see that exhibited in Judah in what we've read time and time and time again. He does not look beyond at all. He just goes, these people, did bad things to our sister. We're going to kill them all. And even Jacob gets upset at him for not considering the consequences. What on earth did he think was going to happen killing Joseph? That was ridiculous, so short-sighted. And we saw that backfire too, right? He just wanted to earn back that affection from his father, and that's the very thing that he lost in doing that. And then, and then with with his sons, he wouldn't give his son to Tamar because he just, without thinking, was like, oh, he's probably going to die too. And I'm just not going to really stop and think this through. And look how that turned out. I mean, that was beyond embarrassing for him, definitely, for him to have to say this prostitute is more righteous than I am. So he's the example of myopia. His brother Joseph kind of foils that caricature, you could say, or symbol of myopia, right? So He constantly exhibits this longevity of vision, spiritually and in this case, very logistically and practically.
Yeah. And Joseph is constantly faced with the temptation to adopt spiritual myopia.
He never really considers it.
Well, that the thing that he always comes against is the temptation to adopt that, whether it is the temptation of Potiphar's wife or the temptation to despair in prison, right? And in the example, and this is why, like, it seems on this, like, in some sense, it seems like Joseph is this perfect character because he just does nothing wrong, right? And you're alluding to the mythological hero being that inhuman perfect character. Like, I think I can draw some parallels with that Joseph is written as this mythological hero.
Yes, he's an embodiment of this sort of.
And the reason why they're like that is because, at least for the mythological hero, in their case, they are written as archetypes. They're written as exaggerations of perfection to be emulated, so that people can look up to them. And I think Joseph can play the same role. Like, yeah, he's setting this example for us to in the face of the temptation to be short-sighted, to look at the bigger picture, to look at the transcendent, to look, above the clouds.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that is kind of runs counter to the current of all mankind. Like you said, our greatest sin is our short-sightedness, and it's true because you have an eternal soul, and in fact, yours specifically is hidden with Christ on high. And so, as much as we like to talk about this earthly life being separate from our eternal life, actually that threshold passes by. When you accepted Christ, you that was the first day that you walked in eternity. We're walking in and out. And some of us choose to develop the ability to see with eternal vision, is to see on an eternal scale, and that's seeing beyond. Joseph, I don't know if he was focused on eternity necessarily, but he was at least had things in mind like that had to do with the most important thing to him seemed to be preserving his relationship with God. It was kind of him and God versus everyone else. So he clings to that, and that's sort of not something that he plans on setting aside anytime soon. So that kind of is, I think, the driver behind his longevity of view. And at the very least, maybe he has in mind the promises to the descendants of his forefathers, and that's a very long view to see. But he seems to kind of have forgotten or forsaken his household a little bit. Like he feels betrayed by them, and he's not concerned with rejoining his family really. So at this particular time, so I'm not sure if that was driving, his kind of farsightedness, but there's something there. So, but and the lesson is, for us as Christians, we have the whole scope of eternity ahead of us, and that's what needs to inform our priorities and our hierarchies.
Yeah.
So you're right. That's a really
that needs to inform our hierarchies.
Insight to draw from a Kempis. Man, what a book to reference.
It's a great book.
Dude, how many places can you look at a study of Joseph in Genesis and you hear imitation of Christ referenced? It's quality stuff, listeners. Daniel's here all week.
Well, Peter's here drawing out the wisdom from the text, and I'm just playing off
Nathaniel.
of that. He's giving me, he's throwing me bones here and there. I just know where to pick them up. All right.
So yeah, that's
chapter 41.
Brings us through 41. Wow, we really powered through. Any symbolism of signet rings that you want to talk about, or are we gonna leave that alone for now?
I can't recall any particular thing. Do you have one in mind?
It happens occasionally that someone gets like Haman was given Xerxes' signet ring,
Mm.
the Book of Esther, Artaxerxes.
Signet ring.
There are a couple. I mean, it's something that shows up. I'm not sure if there's any typology here necessarily. Nothing comes to mind immediately. I'll say that.
Yeah, not sure about that.
But it is like a symbol of power. Like it's a so signet. I actually have a signet ring. It's 3D printed.
Fancy.
Yeah, I had that somebody make that for me a while ago, and it's kind of fun. A little stamp, some wax on my mail, but I'm not signing documents with it, unfortunately, which would be epic. But a king at this time, they would put their seal in wax, and anyone would recognize that was it's like a signature, right?
Yeah.
It could be used for other things too. So like you can put that seal on around a letter that's been like bound. So then if the seal is broken, someone else has read it. So it's kind of like a privacy thing. Sometimes people would do that on their doors. So like when they would leave the house, they'd like seal their door with wax, not necessarily with their signet, but in that way they would know or their chest or something. They would know if someone had broken into it. So
yeah,
there's kind of like the privacy thing, the identity thing, the authority thing.
Yeah, but here we see Pharaoh giving Joseph all the administrative authority in the land,
giving him his signature, right? Like the ability to and the thing is there's only one signet ring, so like Joseph has it. It's not like they had a copy made and handed to him. He took it off of his finger and put it on Joseph, on Joseph's hand. So it's like Pharaoh isn't even signing documents anymore. That is all like.
That's probably why Pharaoh had to point everyone to Joseph. Like, I can't do anything. It's like, you ask me for food, I don't even have the power to give you food. Go to him. Yeah, it's like he is doing.
That's so true. That's pretty funny. Way to delegate, King. Way to go, Pharaoh. They say that delegating is the secret of leadership. So.
Yeah, well,
he nailed that one. Okay, all right, I'll be done.
That's good. I think we got some good stuff here. I wish we could go all night and talk about Joseph's brothers.
That would be fun, but a little short-sighted. That might encourage chaos in our lives.
Yes, that would not.
Rather than order.
A long-sighted view would take care of my future self in 12 hours.
Way to apply the material, Nathaniel. You're already picking it up right there. So.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much. This has been a really good conversation.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah. This is I'm refreshed by this conversation.
I am too, and energized. Yeah. And thank you, Lord, for these scriptures. And
absolutely.
The wisdom to perceive the meaning you've endowed in them. So.
Yeah. So to everyone who's watching and listening, thank you. If you have made it this far, you are a champ.
Legend.
If you made it this far. And stay tuned for the next session. Hopefully we'll be able to power through as much of Joseph's story as we can. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful.
So next time you're going to go 42 through 50, one go, just bang it all out.
That's very long-sighted of you.
It's a pipe dream. All right.
But yeah, well, hopefully this conversation also inspires others to study the Bible the same way or in similar ways.
Yeah, dig in, grab a friend. Microphone not necessary, but definitely dope if you have one. And but the friend is the priority.
Friend is essential.
Yeah, and the scriptures.
Yes. So. Love it. All right.